Welcome to your deep dive. Today we're going on a journey.
A journey.
Yeah. Into Islamic Sharia law.
Oh, yes.
You've given us a really fascinating mix of sources.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like legal texts, discussions of like the principles behind the law, and even some practical advice.
Oh, cool.
It's going to be an exciting exploration, I think.
I think so, too.
Sharia law is something that we hear people talk about a lot, but I don't know how many people really understand it
I think you're right.
in its full depth.
Yeah.
So we're going to be diving into, where did it come from?
Okay.
Like, what are the different schools of thought?
Right.
And how does it address just like
Everything.
all the different things in life?
Yeah.
From prayer to inheritance.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting when I was reading through this was just how much detail there is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, even in like a simple act, like ablution. Like, did you know that some scholars think that if you eat camel meat, you have to perform ablution,
Interesting.
and others don't?
That's a good point, and it highlights the dynamic nature of Islamic jurisprudence.
Yeah.
That it's not this, like,
It's not
monolithic, unchanging entity,
Right.
but it's constantly evolving.
So that makes me think, okay, what are the
Right.
building blocks? Like, where does this actually,
That's a great question.
where does it come from?
So Sharia law has three core components.
Okay.
The Quran,
Okay.
the Sunnah,
Yeah.
and Ijtihad.
So obviously the Quran being
The Holy
the
Book.
holy book of Islam
Yeah.
is going to be a key part of this.
Absolutely foundational.
Okay.
It's the foundation. It contains both fixed laws and guiding principles. It's sort of like the Constitution, if you will.
Okay.
So, for example, you have the verse that states, "The command is for none but Allah."
Okay.
So that establishes like divine authority as the source of law.
Okay.
And then you have other verses emphasizing societal well-being, like the principle of removing evil with good.
But the Quran doesn't necessarily like
Layout.
spell out every single detail for every single situation.
Precisely.
Right.
That's where the Sunnah comes in.
Okay.
And the Sunnah is the teachings and practices of the Prophet Muhammad.
Okay.
So that's sort of like the Supreme Court interpreting the Constitution in a way,
Okay.
providing a framework for applying the Quran's principles to daily life.
So it's like a guide to how
Exactly.
to live in accordance with the Quran.
Yes, exactly.
Got it.
And then we have Ijtihad,
Okay.
which is essentially juristic reasoning.
Okay.
So this allows Islamic scholars to derive rulings for new situations or issues that aren't explicitly addressed in the Quran or the Sunnah.
So there's like a
Yeah.
built-in flexibility
Oh.
for as the world changes.
Precisely.
So it can adapt.
Ijtihad ensures that Sharia remains applicable to the ever-evolving circumstances of human society.
But there are different schools of thought within Islam.
Of course.
So you're going to get some variations in interpretation.
Absolutely.
So we have the Quran as like the foundation. We've got the Sunnah as like the guide for application.
Exactly.
And we've got Ijtihad, which allows for some
Interpret.
reasoned interpretation.
Yes.
So what does this intricate system actually govern?
What aspects of life fall under the scope of Sharia?
Yeah.
Well, the scope is vast. It covers ritual practices, personal conduct, family matters, financial transactions, legal proceedings,
Wow.
even punishments.
Okay.
So it guides Muslims on how to interact with God,
Okay.
with each other, and with the world around them.
One thing I thought was so interesting in this section about ritual practices or ibadah was just the level of detail,
Oh, yeah.
even in something like ablution.
It's true.
Like just how much detail went into that.
The sources offer fascinating insights into the nuances of ablution,
Yeah.
covering everything from the order of washing to the situations that necessitate it.
Yeah.
So, for instance, there's the whole debate about whether eating camel meat requires ablution, which speaks to the diverse interpretations within Islamic jurisprudence.
It's like imagining all these scholars sitting around, having dinner and debating about camel meat and ablution.
I can only imagine how lively those debates must have been.
Yeah.
Another interesting detail is the allowance of wiping over socks instead of washing the feet during ablution.
Oh, really?
Which is considered part of the Sunnah, even for those at home.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
So it's like these seemingly small details provide a window into this rich tradition.
Indeed, these practices demonstrate a commitment to ritual purity that goes beyond the superficial.
Yeah.
It's about approaching even the mundane acts with intentionality and mindfulness.
Yeah.
It's a whole different way of looking at things.
It really is.
Yeah, it's about a whole way of life.
Yeah. Speaking of intentionality,
Okay.
Sharia's guidelines on personal conduct, or adab, extends to, areas like dress, food, and social interactions.
Right.
I'm particularly interested in like the dietary laws.
Yep.
Specifically, the concept of halal meat. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so halal meat, it goes beyond just dietary restrictions.
Okay.
The method of slaughter is really important, and it focuses on the drainage of blood and hygiene,
Okay.
which is deeply rooted in the idea of consuming clean and wholesome food.
So it's not just about what you're eating, but
It's how it's prepared.
Yeah.
And the reasoning behind them.
That makes you think about the connection between religious practice and
Absolutely.
practical considerations
Yeah.
like health and hygiene.
Totally. And that holistic approach extends to other areas of life as well,
Okay.
like family matters.
Okay.
Sharia provides detailed guidelines for marriage, divorce, and inheritance.
Yeah, I was reading about the adat period after a divorce.
Yes.
And it seems like more than just a legal waiting period.
Yeah, you're right.
Like the adat period where a woman continues to reside in her ex-husband's house and he's responsible for her maintenance.
Goes beyond financial support.
Okay.
It's designed to provide stability and ensure her well-being during that transition.
Okay.
And it allows for potential reconciliation.
So there's like an emotional aspect to it.
An emotional and a practical aspect. It covers all the bases.
And then inheritance.
Yes.
Sharia outlines the specific shares for family members.
That's right.
Like, how is that decided?
It takes into account their roles and responsibilities within the family structure.
Okay.
So, for example, the differences in shares between sons and daughters reflect their traditional responsibilities.
Oh.
And the expectation that sons will typically bear the financial burden of supporting their families.
So it's trying to provide a safety net for
Absolutely.
everyone.
Trying to create a system of fairness and equity within that family structure.
Moving on to like financial transactions.
Okay.
Sharia has these really interesting guidelines for trade loans and charity.
Yes.
And one of the key principles that I saw was the prohibition of usury.
Yes, or interest on loans.
So why?
It's a really important principle.
Why is that?
It's to prevent exploitation
Okay.
and to encourage a system of financial support that doesn't burden those in need with excessive debt.
So it's about fairness.
Exactly.
And not taking advantage of people when they're in a vulnerable position.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's zakah,
Right.
which is one of the 5 pillars of Islam.
Yeah.
That's the obligatory almsgiving.
So that acts as like a way to...
That's a powerful tool for wealth redistribution
Yeah.
and supporting those in need.
So it's built in.
It's like a built-in system for promoting social justice and economic equality.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful concept.
So we're seeing how Sharia is really weaving ethical considerations into all these...
Into every aspect of life.
different parts of life.
From personal conduct to financial transactions.
Yeah, and even legal proceedings and punishments.
Absolutely.
One thing I thought was really interesting was just the emphasis on fairness and due process. Yes, it's a very just system.
Yeah, the importance of witnesses, the principle of proportionate punishment,
Yes.
and the presumption of innocence.
All very important concepts.
It seems like it's really trying to create a system that is actually just.
Yes, it values justice and it protects individual rights.
So, for example, with witnesses,
Yes,
in financial matters, the Quran says you need 2 witnesses.
that's right.
So that's a high standard of evidence.
It is a high standard, but it's there to ensure fairness.
And the principle of proportionate punishment.
Yes, the idea that the punishment should fit the crime.
So it's not just about, like, revenge or...
It's not about retribution.
Yeah.
It's about ensuring that the punishment serves a purpose,
Oh,
deterrence, and promoting a just society.
But Sharia is not without its complexities
Of course not.
and areas of debate.
It would be strange if it was.
Yeah.
With centuries of tradition and interpretation,
Yeah.
there are bound to be different viewpoints and disagreements.
So can you give us some examples of those debates?
Sure. One example is the discussion about whether to stand for a passing funeral procession.
Okay.
The sources highlight how this practice evolved even during the Prophet Muhammad's lifetime.
So even something that seems
Something that seems straightforward
simple like that.
was subject to reinterpretation
Okay.
based on changing circumstances.
So it's able to adapt.
Exactly. Sharia can adapt to new realities while adhering to its core principles.
Are there any other examples?
Another one is the permissibility of whitewashing graves.
Okay.
or building structures over them.
So you've got these very specific
Yes, very specific issues.
things that you might not even think about.
Things you might not think about, but they spark debate and discussion.
And that's how...
And that's how the system stays dynamic and relevant.
Yeah.
It's a constant effort to interpret and apply principles to specific situations.
It's like this dialogue between tradition and modern life.
That's a great way to put it.
But unfortunately, Sharia is often misrepresented.
Yes, unfortunately, that's true.
Or misunderstood in contemporary discourse.
It's a topic that often makes headlines, but rarely is it presented with the nuance and complexity it deserves.
So what are some of the misconceptions that we should be aware of?
One major misconception is the conflation of Islamic law with secular law.
Okay.
They operate under different principles and serve different purposes.
So you can't just
impose a secular lens on Sharia.
take one system and apply it to...
Exactly. It leads to misunderstanding.
What else?
Another misconception is the punishment for theft.
Okay.
Often the focus is solely on the physical punishment,
Without considering all of
the full context of the law and its application.
So was there a lot more to the story than we typically hear?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Understanding the nuances and complexities of Sharia is crucial to having informed and respectful conversations about it.
So this deep dive we're doing,
Yes.
it's really just scratching the surface.
It is. We're just scratching the surface.
This really big topic.
Islamic jurisprudence is a rich and evolving field.
Okay.
It deserves thoughtful exploration
Yeah.
and open mind.
While we've talked about a lot of different things,
We have.
one question keeps coming back to me.
Okay.
Sharia is a holistic system.
Yes.
It's spiritual and practical,
That's right.
but how does that actually play out in practice?
That's an excellent question, and it gets to the heart of what makes Sharia unique.
Okay.
It's not just a set of laws.
Okay.
It's a way of life.
So it's
It's an ethical framework informed by faith.
it's about how you see the world.
Yes, every action, every decision is considered in light of its spiritual and ethical implications.
Like you're viewing life through this
Exactly.
through spiritual lens.
Through a spiritual lens.
I can give an example.
Sure, take the concept of halal meat.
Okay.
It's not just about dietary restrictions.
Okay.
It's about ensuring that the food consumed is pure, wholesome, and obtained ethically.
Right.
The prohibition of usury
Yeah.
isn't simply an economic regulation. It's a moral imperative
Okay.
to protect the vulnerable from exploitation.
So it's about...
It's about more than just the rules.
Yeah.
It's about the values behind the rules.
And this applies to...
This applies to everything.
Family matters.
Finance, legal proceedings.
It's trying to create this society that reflects
Absolutely.
these values.
It's a beautiful tapestry of faith and practicality,
Yeah.
aimed at creating a society that reflects those values.
But Sharia has also evolved over time.
Of course it has. Like any legal system, it's a living tradition.
Right. Because our sources don't just present it like,
No.
here are the rules and that's it.
It's not a static set of rules.
Yeah.
It's about the reasoning behind the rulings,
Okay.
the discussions and debates among scholars,
Right.
and how practices have evolved over time.
So it's constantly being...
Constantly being interpreted and reinterpreted
Yeah.
to fit the changing circumstances of human society.
Like the debate about standing for a passing funeral procession.
Exactly.
That evolved over time.
Even during the Prophet's lifetime,
Yeah.
showing that even established customs were subject to reconsideration.
Where the discussions about...
About whitewashing graves,
Yeah.
building structures over them.
These are all examples of how...
They highlight the dynamism
Yeah.
within Islamic jurisprudence,
Okay.
this ongoing effort to balance tradition with the complexities of modern life.
So Sharia is not
It's not static.
monolithic.
No, it's a living tradition.
It's constantly being...
It's constantly being interpreted and reinterpreted.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that understanding Sharia requires going beyond simplistic interpretations
Okay.
and engaging with its depth and nuance.
So it's more about reasoned discourse
Yes,
and scholarly interpretation
absolutely.
than just a rigid set of rules.
It's a living tradition that's constantly being shaped by new interpretations.
And that process of interpretation is ongoing.
Always,
So there are always new challenges,
of course.
new context, new questions that need to be...
Thought about. Absolutely.
One thing that stood out to me in all of this was the practicality.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just these abstract principles.
It's about providing real-world guidance for navigating daily life.
Exactly.
Right.
So, for example, the iddat period following a divorce,
Right?
it's not just a waiting period.
It's not just a legal waiting period.
There are all of these practical arrangements
Exactly.
to help support the woman.
It demonstrates a commitment to support and stability
Yeah.
during a sensitive transition.
And then there's the inheritance laws.
Yes.
It's not just about dividing up assets.
It's about ensuring that everyone's needs are met
Yeah.
in a just and equitable manner.
So it's looking at the whole family.
Exactly. Sharia takes into account the complexities of family dynamics,
Right.
and it seeks to prevent hardship
While
and
also,
promoting fairness.
and then we see this in finance too.
Yes, absolutely.
With the prohibition of usury.
Right.
It had these real implications
For how business is conducted
Yeah.
and how we interact financially.
So it's about,
It's about promoting fairness and preventing exploitation.
and then zakah goes beyond just individual charity.
It's a societal obligation.
Yeah.
It's about creating a more just society.
So it's really about taking these values and putting them into action.
That's what zakah is all about.
Yeah.
Putting compassion and social responsibility into action.
It's really interesting to me how Sharia is so tied
It's a faith.
to Islamic faith.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, how does it address people who don't share that faith?
That's an important question.
Yeah.
Our sources do offer some insights.
Okay.
For instance, there's the discussion about the distribution of zakah.
Okay.
While the primary recipients are Muslims,
Yeah.
there is debate about whether it can be extended to non-Muslims under certain circumstances.
Here's that flexibility
There is some flexibility.
to take into account the broader context.
Yes, context is always important. Beyond zakah, there's a strong emphasis on justice and fairness in dealings with all people, regardless of their faith.
So it's not about excluding people.
No, it's about creating a just and compassionate society for all.
This deep dive has really been eye-opening.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, it's made me rethink my assumptions about Sharia.
It's a complex and nuanced system,
Yeah.
and it's one that deserves to be understood on its own terms.
It's not about imposing rules
No, it's about fostering a just and compassionate society.
that values ethical conduct
Absolutely.
and the well-being of all of its members.
That's the heart of Sharia.
This has been a really incredible journey.
And it's been a fascinating exploration.
Yeah, we've unpacked the complexities of Sharia.
We've gone deep into the sources.
And I think gained a much deeper appreciation for its richness and depth.
I think so too.
And for you listening, we want to leave you with a final thought.
Okay.
If Sharia is ultimately about creating a just and compassionate society, what aspects of it resonate with your own values and aspirations,
That's a great question for listeners to reflect on.
regardless of your faith or background?
It's about finding common ground.
What can we learn from this ancient system
Yes.
as we strive to build a more just and compassionate world
It's a journey we're all on together.
for ourselves and future generations?
Absolutely.
Till next time, keep exploring.